Hebrews 2:7 gives us a marvelous example of how difficult translation can be. And while I know this is the Greek verse, singular of the day, I do need to look at the verses before and after it. But it does show how difficult it can be when there's a double or a prophetic meaning on a passage. So we're going to be looking at Hebrews 2, the ending of verse 6 through the beginning of verse 8. Te estin anthropos, hati memneske autou, huios anthropou, hati episkepte auton, elatosas auton, brachute par angelus, doxe kai time estephanosas auton, panta hupetaxis hupakato ton padon autou. So go back through and do a quick translation. Who is, and then this is our problem word. We'll just say man for now. That you remember him, in other words, you take thought of him, or Son of Man, notice there's no article in front of it, that you care for him. Memneske is taking its direct object in the genitive. Now in verse 7, you have made him a little lower, and it can be in terms of significance, but here certainly it's a little lower temporarily. A little lower than angels. Glory and honor you have crowned him. You have put all things under his feet. Okay, let's start phrasing it. So who is man? Get to that hati clause. Certainly that'd be its own line. Here's punctuation and an or the Son of Man, another hati clause, that you care for him. Punctuation. You made him a little lower than the angels. Glory and honor, you have crowned him, comma, you have subjected all things under his feet. Okay, so this is poetry, so this can be pretty easy to phrase. And so you may just want to, go with normal phrasing for poetry. You can still see the parallelism. And then you get down to verse 8. We'll just leave it like that. So the phrasing is pretty straightforward, isn't it? But what on earth is going on with the translation of anthropos and then the singular autou, auton, auton, and auton? Okay, this is the challenge of this passage. So I'll switch over here to accordance, and I want to look first of all at the psalm that's being quoted. The author of Hebrews is quoting Psalm 8 and one passage or phrase out of Psalm 110. And in its original context, Lord, O Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth. And when I consider the heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars, which you have set in place, then you come to the passage that is translated. And I should say, this is a pretty controversial passage, but I'm just going to give you what I think it means. By mankind, you'll notice the CSB says human being, NLT says mere mortals, and the Hebrew is just a word for a man, enash. What is mankind, the NIV goes with, because it's not an individual person that the psalmist is talking about. Yes, the Hebrew is singular, but we're talking about people. So what is mankind? That you're mindful of them, CSB, him, them, NLT. What's going on? I think when you refer to mankind in general, them is the appropriate one. The problem is human beings, which actually is the singular, a son of man. Bain Adam. Okay, this is what's creating the problem. In the Hebrew, that's just a standard word for human beings. The problem, of course, is that Psalm 8 is messianic. You have made them, and the footnote is or him, a little lower than the angels, and there is a variant meaning God, and crowned them or crowned him with glory and honor. So who are you talking about here? Are you talking about the original context of the psalm where he's talking about people in general? Or do you start understanding that this is a messianic psalm and it's pointing forward to the individual human being, Jesus Christ? You made him rulers over the works of your hands. You put everything under, and here's where it gets really difficult. The NIV has their feet. CSB has his feet, because this is going to be purely messianic by the time you get to Psalm 110 and into Hebrews 2. So that's the original context of the passage. So let's come back, and you're going to see that the real issue is, should we be translating the Hebrews 6 as reflecting the original context in Psalms, or should we translate Psalm 8 in Hebrews 2, knowing that Psalm 8 is really messianic and is pointing to the individual man, Jesus Christ? And so that's the question in this passage. If you go down the NLT, said, what are mere mortals, okay, that's your anthropos, that you should think about them, or a son of man, again, the Hebrew context, that you should care for him. Well, what happened here? Well, everyone reading their Bible should know at this point that this Son of Man is a messianic reference, not to people in general, but to Jesus. And so even the NLT, and you'll notice the NIV does the same thing, switches to the singular him. And then in verse 7, yet for a little while you made them, people, a little lower than the angels, and crowned them with glory and honor. You gave them authority over all things. But you can see, except for the him, the NLT is reflecting the original broader understanding without really making the messianic interpretation impossible. The NIV follows the same basic suit with a few little differences. What is mankind? So somewhat of a singular concept, a collective concept, that you are mindful of them, a son of man, that you care for him. Okay, I just talked about that. You made them, people, a little lower than the angels. You crowned them with glory and honor. You put everything under their feet. So the footnote specifically in the first part of verse 8 says, you made him a little lower than the angels. You crowned him with glory and honor. And then in 8, you put everything under his feet. So the messianic understanding, which certainly is what the author of Hebrews intends us to understand, is at least in the footnotes. But if you want to see a translation that is stronger on the messianic interpretation, you go to the CSB. What is man, that you remember him? Or the, so you're already making the transition to messianic, the Son of Man, that you care for him. You made him lower than the angels for a short time. That's the incarnation. You crowned him with glory and honor. That's the exaltation, much like you have in Philippians 2. And you subjected everything under his feet. Again, Psalm 110, purely messianic. And I probably should finish out in the first part of verse 9 just to complete the thought. Now, in putting everything in subjection to Christ, God left nothing outside of Christ's control, filling in the antecedents. But in fact, we do not yet see everything under Christ's control. And that is when you look at the world just without the eyes of faith, it doesn't look like everything's under God's control. But even in the midst of the chaos of our world, we do see Jesus, and that's our perception by faith. So this really is a fascinating passage when you look at the complexities of the translation process. How much of the original Psalm 2 context do you keep where the psalmist was talking about mankind, or how much do you bring it into its messianic understanding, the full understanding? It is certainly amazing that in terms of mankind, that God is concerned about us, that he cares for us. And one of the ways in which he cared for us is sending the Messiah, who went through his humiliation when he became a human being, and yet at the end of his life, God crowned him with glory and honor by putting everything in subjection under his feet. We don't see that right now, do we? It is a mess out there. But in the midst of the chaos of our lives, we can by faith say Jesus, who in fact is over all things.